Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Elizabeth, also for inviting us. And really, it's a privilege to be here. It's also very interesting that in this particular session, we can show not only the importance and the relevance, almost the emergency for having more and better data, but also that most of us, the actors in the field of data on gender and science, we're working together. I was just thinking with Eurostat, we are, you are in our advisory committee, we are in your steering committee with GRC, we're working together. Sweden is actually funding our project, so which I also want to acknowledge. With UNU Merit, we work together. It's really very interesting how we, there is a group of agencies that have taken really seriously the challenge of producing more evidence for decision making in the field of gender equality. Now, yesterday I took the advantage that this meeting was on a Monday, so yesterday I went to Oxford to visit a friend of mine, and she's the principal of one of the colleges there in Oxford. And while visiting some other colleges, I came up with, I found this plaque on the floor, which reminded me about the importance of this particular meeting and of still doing this. So not only did the first woman study at Jesus College in 1974, but they even needed to put it on the floor at the entrance. So this is clearly an unsolved issue. This is clearly something that is still very, very much a policy issue. The other timely reference is the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that we sometimes forget, but science we have our own human right, Article 27, and where we clearly, when we look into both the Article 2, well, and the Article 27, we can basically argue that the gender equality in STEM, in science, technology, education, engineering, mathematics, is part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So now, in that sense, at UNESCO, for us, we have two global priorities at UNESCO. Overall, UNESCO stands for United Nations Education, Science, Culture Organization. So we cover quite a number of different disciplines, but the two global priorities are Africa and gender. So all our programs need to be geared towards making a difference in Africa and towards contributing towards gender equality. And in terms of gender equality in sciences, which is the area where I work in, we have a number of different programs that we put in place, both from the science and the education perspectives. And some of you, there is a colleague from OSD around, some of you will be finding a reference to some of these. And some of the publications around there are also for grab, if there are still a couple of them on the table. So well, no, let me skip this one. I will talk about the SAGA project, which if you have been to one of the previous gender summits, you might have heard about. I see Maris and some other colleagues who have heard about the project and are actually implementing it. As said, we are collaborating with many other organizations. I want to just briefly mention that the SAGA project, the first task we had when we were discussing, it is about measurement and about policies towards gender equality in science. So we were thinking measurement, policies. Okay, when we had written the first draft of the project, one of the first tasks was to do a gap analysis of policies towards gender equality in STI. And there we clearly came up with the difficulty that to do a gap analysis, you actually need to understand what is the whole picture. the whole universe to see what is missing. So we developed a tool that, okay, up there, what we call the gender objectives list. It's not a full classification maybe, but it's a full list of gender objectives for STI policies. So for the different aspects of gender equality in STI policy that need to be addressed in STI that need to be addressed by policies. And these are then related to the policies to actually attain them and the different indicators to measure them. This is to break down a little bit this idea that you get from some countries. I'm always in contact and discussing with particularly developing countries, and sometimes you get a message, well, but you know, our students in science, we have 60% of women, so we have no problem of gender equality. We're actually very well covered, so this is not an issue that we want to discuss. And this is clearly looking at one indicator and talking about something else. So and we wanted to make sure that we can have indicators that actually refer to the policy issues that we want to address. And then the SAGA Toolkit, which was also outside, about different tools for measuring and for obtaining the information on policies. So what we have been doing in the last few months is to pilot these tools in a certain number of countries. And first of all, I want to give you only briefly what are the 7 main groups of gender objectives so that you can understand where we're coming from. So about social norms and stereotypes, about what happens in primary and secondary education, what happens in higher education, the career progression of scientists and engineers, the research content and practice, and that refers very much to this morning's session, which was really, I think, a very, very important part of this type of meetings, because frequently we end up discussing that there are not enough girls coming into science, and we discuss only primary education, or we refer to the cultural, general cultural problems of the societies, but we forget the centrality of the issue about the research content and the practice that was discussed this morning. The other issue is about the policy making, the participation of women in policy making, and the existence of policies for gender equality. And what is here, the 7th, is about entrepreneurship and innovation and the participation of women in that area. So the toolkit is a little bit, takes inspiration also from she figures, but also goes beyond in some areas, because we move very much into the policies and policy instruments. We are collecting information of what countries are doing in terms of policies, what their policies are, and what their policy instruments are in terms of gender equality in STI. So if they have put together a fund for a specific, for funding women entrepreneurs, or if they have a special regulation in terms of their scholarships so that women can cover their maternity leaves, or if they have put in place a proper paternity leaves that include maternity and paternity leaves, or parental leaves, that's the word. Well, all these types of, we are surveying these types of policies and policy instruments, and we're putting them into a platform that will be online by the end of the year, so that also countries can look into what has been done, and always relating to the gender objectives. So if you, as a policymaker, consider you want to solve one particular problem, you can look up what other countries have done towards that particular issue, and not just about the gender equality concept in general. So, and we have also developed the survey of drivers and barriers. Again, this talks to some of the issues that were discussed this morning, so that we can actually understand what is it that, where are the real bottlenecks in the careers of scientists and engineers, and get more information, more evidence towards policy making. We've also been playing around with graphs like Anna presented earlier, in terms of what are, we're trying to see where this is a about what type of, how many policies or policy instruments a given country has. This is just an example. For the different gender objectives, you see a profile of this. And then just very briefly, these are the working papers. These are the pilot countries. We chose a number of different countries from different regions so that we can see also different profiles and understand if the tools are working. And here, what I wanted to show rather is some of the impacts. Of course, these are not direct impacts. These are impacts that work together with the fact that we're doing the pilot studies in these countries. But for instance, after Argentina started the SAGA project, they also started almost immediately after the program for women in science at the Ministry of Science and Technology. In the case of the Fond de Quebec, it was, I don't know if the fact that you were bringing gender into your strategic plan triggered your participation in SAGA or vice versa, but the causation is clearly not, we cannot express that, but we see the relationship. The new STI policy in Jamaica, they were preparing it while we started doing a workshop on SAGA there, and they immediately incorporated a chapter on gender and science into their new policy. So these types, in the Gambia, they are also analyzing a new law or a new act for science and technology, and again, due to our work there, they are incorporating the gender issue into their laws, so that is also. Then there are a number of smaller things that happened in these countries, including outreach activities, but even that Uruguay decided to focus their National Science Week on women in science. So this happens somehow in parallel. These countries are working with us because they are interested, and because they are working with us, they are getting more interested. So it's actually an interesting work. And this is before we can even have the data from the countries, yeah, because the data are not, we are going to present the reports by the end of the year. This is an impact beyond the science, technology, innovation policies. For instance, in Argentina, in their open government, in their plan for the open government, they included a chapter on gender equality in science and technology. And this was really a direct impact of our work with them on SAGA. And in Thailand, they started a project to revise all their textbooks on STEM education with a gender lens. So this is really, there was two other impacts that I want to mention, and that these are two references that I invite you to also look into it, which is the declaration of the World Science Forum last year in Jordan, which has really incorporated a full chapter on gender, and Elizabeth was there, and there was the mini gender summit for the Arab states with Rana, and out of that exercise where we were also part, we contributed to the declaration. We made sure that the paragraphs on gender would stay in the declaration, and we eventually got practically one full chapter in the declaration. It was very, very good. And I want to the recommendation on science and scientific researchers, which is a new global recommendation that the UNESCO General Conference just approved in November last year, which incorporates also all the concepts from SAGA. We were working on the recommendation. I invite you to really also look for it. And as you can see, even the cover of the publication of the recommendation is from one of our UNESCO laureates on women in science. So we made I also invite you to visit the recommendation to see what the countries have actually really decided to do. This is something that was approved by the 195 member states of UNESCO. So now we are going to monitor it. We're going to monitor the implementation of this. We're not enforcing anything. We're not nowhere do we have the capacity to enforce, but we are going to monitor. So if you want to reach our website, you can use this QR, and thank you very much.